Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. I was waiting in another Zoom room and nobody was showing up. So I thought I better check. Nick, you there? There he is. All right.
Yes.
Everybody hear me okay? Cool. Deanna, come on back. You there, Deanna? There she is. Okay. So let's do a very 5-minute review here. So to understand Marx's view on how change happened in the world, we got to start back with the philosopher Hegel. And Hegel's big idea that Marx borrows is called, the law of dialectical process or progress. What's the law of dialectical progress? I know most of you were not here. I think Chloe was last week, but hopefully you looked at last week's PowerPoint.
Is it that there's history follows a pattern?
Yeah, exactly. What's the pattern?
Uh, Trying to remember. I looked at the readings last week. Um,
I got it.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so Hegel thought that there was a mental or a moral process that took place in the mind, and it followed this pattern. It followed the thesis versus the antithesis, and those things ended up with the synthesis.
Right.
And
So, yep, that's it.
yeah,
So don't get hung up. That probably makes no sense to
right.
you. Don't get hung up on the terminology. Those are the terms he used for this model. And he thought that in our minds, there was this constant battle between good and evil, between making good choices and bad choices, constantly going on, all going on in our minds. And that we continually through the day, we have to resolve this contradiction. We have to resolve, on the cartoon I have on the PowerPoint is, which button do you push? Be a dick or don't be a dick? And whatever button we push, whatever we decide to do, is the synthesis. That's the action that we take. And so basically, we start a new direction that way. We start a new path, having made this decision. That becomes the new thesis. And every thesis has an antithesis. And that sets up a contradiction. And for Hegel, this is all happening in people's brains. And this can be as simple as, let me just put it in real world terms, everyday events. So you're sleeping, you stayed up late studying theory the night before, your alarm goes off at 7 a.m. and you don't want to get up yet. You're still tired. So you have a choice. You can hit the snooze button or you can get up. So that's your thesis and antithesis. That's the contradiction you're facing at that moment. And you decide. Let's say you decide to hit the snooze button. The synthesis is you go back to sleep. And that path that you have now chosen has its own antithesis. It has its own opposition. Maybe it's now that you're sleeping, you are not walking your dog, right? And so if you're sleeping in and you're not walking your dog, and your dog is used to being walked at 7 a.m., and so when you finally wake up at 10 in the morning, the synthesis of that action is your dog has pooped on the floor. And then you have another choice, clean it up or don't clean it up, leave it for my roommates, right? So we go through our days making these decisions, and it's this conflict, these little conflicts that we're deciding on, which decide the activities in our day and what happens to us during our day. You're walking across the quad, you see a person who you are always polite to, but you don't particularly like, and they see you and they say, hey, hey, Chloe, how are you doing? And Chloe says, so she has the choice of greeting me or pretending she doesn't hear me and walking away, right? And the synthesis is what she decides to do, right? So these little decisions are propelling our activities during the day. And Hegel says this is what drives what he calls it history, but that what he means is this is what drives events in the world. These reconciling these contradictions and the behavior we take is what creates events in the world. Okay? And that's important to know because it's this dialectical. So Marx says in your essay, he says he's turning Hegel on his head. He retains the dialectical model, but he says this isn't happening in your head. These contradictions are happening in the real world, and they can be observed, they can be studied. So Marx's spin on Hegel is called dialectical materialism, because for Marx, it's not happening in your head. These are real world events going on that affect you and affect your behavior, and that you also affect, you influenced by your activities. Okay, so dialectical materialism. And then I said, I talked about a couple of insights that Marx had about human behavior. Talked about a couple of them that lie underneath his theory. And what is insight number one? Or what's one of those insights? Just about human behavior.
Can I
Yeah,
say it?
go it. Yeah.
The first insight is that people are different and that they all don't share the same interests.
Right. Exactly right. So people at different positions within the social hierarchy, maybe that's you're a man or a woman, maybe that's you're 70 years old or you're 22 years old. And people who are in different places, I don't mean physical places, I mean emotional, psychological, intellectual spaces in a society, are going to have different interests. They're not all going to necessarily agree. And the example I used was, are your interests as a student always going to be the same as mine as a professor? Nick, what do you think? Are our interests always going to line up,
Yeah,
as this?
no, I think that our interests will not always line up. That we will have definitely probably maybe contradicting interests too.
Exactly. And so the consequence of this, because, and let's say we could talk about men and women, professors and students, because our interests aren't always the same, there is always in any society a possibility for conflict. And I don't mean necessarily, people are bashing each other over the head necessarily, although that might happen. I mean, you know, harsh exchanges, one group trying to exclude another, or, I mean, think of some of the issues on campus today. I don't know if you noticed, if you were on campus, there was a lot of security because on the one hand, there was a big Turning Point USA rally on campus. And on the other hand, there was whatever the campus Black Students Organization is, they were having a rally. Do you think their interests are the same? On the one hand, you got this room full of white evangelical Christians. On the other hand, you know, Black students. Are their interests going to be the same? No. Do they disagree on lots of issues? Probably, right? I mean, a Black student last week got thrown out of school for expressing his disagreement in the campus free speech area. So, so Marx's theory is a theory of conflict. It's really good at studying social change. And just as a side note, I love talking about Marx because everybody's got an opinion about Marx, but most people don't have a clue as to what he really said. So, as I go through this, you tell me, if we hit any concept of his that just seems too crazy to be believed, like he's some wild, crazy guy. I mean, he looked a little crazy with his hair and all, and his photographs from the 1850s. But so, is that a crazy idea that people in different positions within a society, say you're a minimum wage worker versus a, you know, $250,000 a year managerial person in a corporation, are your interests the same? No, that's common sense, right? So he's saying, so conflict is always going to be built in to any society, or the potential for conflict. Even in the simplest societies, think of foraging bands where everybody's, egalitarian, which doesn't mean everybody's equal, but everybody has the same access to the resources in that society. Even in the simplest, most egalitarian society, you're going to have a gendered division of labor, right? Women get to do some things, men get to do other things, and women can't do men stuff, men can't do women stuff. That sets up a situation where at some point they're going to be in opposition, right? So this is how he viewed the world. And he lived at a time of really just terrible um, there workers' riots, and it's the Industrial Revolution, and working conditions were terrible. There are no social services like we have today. And if you had your arm torn off at the textile mill you were working in, too bad, you lost your job and maybe one of your kids took your job. There's no help for people. And so people were I was in Manchester, England this summer, which is really started out as became a big city because of the textile industry in England in the 17 and 1800s. And that's sort of the center of workers' rebellions, that city in England, because people were rejecting these horrible working conditions and crappy pay that they were working in. Okay, so that's insight number one. What was insight number two?
Is it the class struggles, like society is marked by class conflict?
Well, no, that's an outgrowth of his insight number one, because people don't have the same interests. It's a famous phrase, from his work, which is all history is a history of class struggle. So when Marx saw this dialectical opposition, this material opposition happening in the world, um, he believed that the like one of the primary ones was opposition between classes. So he wasn't thinking about individuals, like I gave the example of whether you choose to get up when your alarm goes off or not. He was thinking about classes of people. So, like workers versus factory owners is what he was thinking about. And that conflict could cause social change. Um, so, what's the other one? Excuse me, I gave you another insight. And I'm honestly asking you because until you tell me, I'm not going to remember it. I'm not looking at my PowerPoint from last week. Hey, Nadia, would you do me a favor for a minute and open up the attendance and just mark the people who are here on the Canvas site?
For sure, I can do that.
Thank you. So, what do you think? What's the other insight? It's on the PowerPoint. No, Chloe, look back at your notes, or you got the PowerPoint open? Come on, what's insight number 2?
Oh wait, are we on insight number 2? I thought we were on was there a third one?
Let's do number 2 first.
I think that was the one that we just talked about. The societies are marked by class conflict.
I think that's the conclusion of insight number 1. But then I'm not looking at my PowerPoint, so I don't know. I wrote that a year ago. What did I write?
Insight number 2, looking at the PowerPoint,
Mm-hmm.
does cover what we talked about just a little bit, the history of class struggle, but there's alienation and exploitation that
Yes.
wasn't discussed yet.
Yeah.
I had
Okay.
notes too. I wasn't. Yeah, I see that now.
Okay. So because of insight number 1, that people don't have different interests, that means in terms of relationships between groups of people, that creates a situation where there can be alienation. And alienation, for Marx, he's using that term in the same way that, like when we talk about, the Declaration of Independence, that all human beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So what does that phrase mean? If you're endowed with inalienable rights, what does that mean?
Like in the context of the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
Yeah,
Or
what
just in-
does the author mean by you have unalienable rights?
you could have anything you put, or like you could work for anything you want.
That could be a consequence of having unalienable rights. Doesn't exactly answer the question. If your rights are inalienable, what cannot happen if you have these unalienable rights?
They are rights that can't be taken away.
Exactly. They can't be taken away from you. Okay, so when Marx talks about, he says, so alienation exists, between people because of these class differences and wealth differences and things between people. And so what he meant by alienation is that things people need are taken from them. They don't have access to them. So if we were sitting in the same room and I grabbed Diana's laptop and said, "You can't use a laptop anymore," I'm alienating her from her laptop. Okay. And so when Marx is saying, there's alienation, think about, we live in a capitalist society. Think about the world as we experience it. Um, do you have the knowledge and the tools you need and like the land, and the tools to grow your own food? I'm not saying could you start a garden. I'm saying could you support yourself growing your own food to grow the food you need to eat in the next year? Probably not. Do you have the tools and raw materials you need to build your own home?